Here. And it looks like recording has begun. Okay. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. I hope you all have been enjoying the conference and are getting a lot of benefit out of it. I have not been able to participate as much as I would like, so I'm anxious to hear how it's going and whether you are learning lots. So my name is Susan Love. I am the administrator of the Climate and Sustainability section in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. And I'm really happy that you are here today for an important discussion about engaging stakeholders. I know that has always been a challenge for many of us. And this new environment where we're all working from home and hybrid and sometimes in the office has made it even more challenging to do robust public engagement. Today, I'm going to share with you some of my recent experiences with engaging stakeholders on two very different projects that were done in two different ways and in two very different circumstances. I'm going to share with you some lessons that I learned from each one and hopefully some best practices that you can draw on for the next time you have an opportunity to engage your stakeholders around an important topic. So first, let's get this out of the way, right? Engaging stakeholders induces anxiety, even in the most seasoned government official. People are unpredictable. How many people are going to come? Will anybody come? Did I buy enough snacks? Are they going to be mad at me? Will I need an armed escort to my car afterwards? Will the press be there? How does my hair look? Etc. And in-person events are also expensive. If you have ever had to purchase foam core board and rent a facility, you know the pain of the expense of stakeholder engagement. And it takes a huge amount of time to ensure public notice of event, to plan it really well, to make sure you have snacks, to have contingency plans. What if it snows? Oops, I forgot to plan for a global pandemic. Things we didn't know we needed to plan for. All the while, this is a major challenge, the engineers on your planning team are moaning about what a waste of time talking to the public is. Not all engineers are like this, but I know you have all interacted with somebody who boo-hoos the value of public engagement. But in addition to being required by your state or local statutes or whatever you happen to be operating under, engaging stakeholders is necessary for a good outcome. Whether you're doing a comp plan, industrial regulations, building a bike lane, you need feedback from the people who are going to benefit from this project or be affected by this project. And believe it or not, that sometimes the feedback that you get is thoughtful, insightful, and super helpful to the end product. I have learned this over and over again in my career, that if you do a great job engaging your stakeholders early, thoughtfully, and intentionally, and then really hearing that feedback and using that feedback, your project will be supported, implemented, or at the very least, not appealed. And we all like it when we don't get sued for something that we've done. So last night as I was driving around, it also occurred to me that at a women's leadership conference, I might also mention the special role that we as women play in public engagement. Now, I haven't done it, this was a thought that occurred to me last night. So I haven't done any studies on this or read the literature, but women are still disproportionately represented in jobs that center around caregiving and in communication fields. And too often in group settings, I have seen the great ideas of women being shut down for numerous reasons. And that can also include great ideas about how to engage with the public, especially, again, I have many very great engineering friends, but sometimes the value of public input is not as valued by more technical folks. And so the examples I'm going to provide to you, I hope that they provide you with some inspiration for moving forward. And I want to also note that the plans that we put in place came about because the teams that I worked on from the ground up wanted to do a really good job with public engagement. It wasn't necessarily a top-down mandate. We knew we could do better than checking a box, and we advocated strongly to do it for the time, for the resources, and for the support to do it. And you can do it too. And I hope that you do the next time you're in a room trying to plan public engagement. So I'm going to try to keep my eye on the chat box. This template is a little bit new to me, but if you have a question or a comment or a thought, please go ahead and put it in the question box, and I'll see if I can get it as we move along. So today I'm going to tell you the tale of two different processes, two different approaches. One is the development of regulations for coastal zone conversion permits. This was a highly rigorous statutory regulatory process made significantly better by robust in-person engagement. The second is development of the state's climate action plan. This is a planning process not guided by any specific state statute or regulation. So we had a lot of flexibility there, but we had to shift quickly into all virtual because we started our public engagement process in March of 2020, and we all know what happened in March of 2020. So first, let's talk about the Coastal Zone project. And I'm going to spend most of the time talking about the Coastal Zone project because this is one that I'm pretty proud of and that we did a lot of stuff. So a little background. The Coastal Zone Conversion Permit Act was passed in 2017 and amended the 1971 Coastal Zone Act, which prohibited heavy industrial development in a strip of land along the coast. So this is a whole hour-long talk in and of itself, but that's the basic information. The Coastal Zone Act is a really important act in the state of Delaware. It is really one of the primary reasons that upwards of 70% of our coastline is in permanent protection of some sort and wasn't turned into oil refineries. So the 2017 Conversion Permit Act allowed some heavy industrial developments on 14 specific already developed sites. And previously, this type of development was not allowed on those sites. And this was seen as a way to provide economic opportunity to sites that were already industrial in nature. They were never going to be nature preserves. These are sites that were served by, that are served by infrastructure and close to job centers and rail. So they're appropriate sites for industrial development. The law specified many specific requirements for this development to move forward, but sort of broadly, and they left the details to the regulatory decision-making process. The Coastal Zone Act has been in the spotlight for decades. It has always been a bit contentious, and these amendments really exacerbated the strong feelings around the Coastal Zone Act. Many projects permitted through the program or denied by the program since the 1970s were the subject of great political, economic, and environmental interests. So the amendments to the act were no different. Tensions ran high, and many environmental advocates were extremely displeased with this bill. And many economic interests thought the amendments, of course, didn't go far enough, right? So you've got that push and pull there, which you are all very cognizant of, I'm sure. We also heard again and again from members of the public that they were unhappy about the opportunity for public comment during the legislative process. And they pointed to a series of public meetings that have been held by the governor and legislators during that same time about other subjects. I can't remember what it was, but I think it might have been marijuana. And they said, you did all these things about this particular issue. Why didn't you do that for the Coastal Zone Act? Because it's so important. So when we started the public process around developing regulations for the Coastal Zone Act, we were already kind of in a little bit of a hole and needed to make sure that we did a really good job digging our way out of that hole and coming up with a good, robust process and a good, robust product. And further, the legislators and the governor promised that DNREC, of which I am a part, had it all under control, and we were going to work these things out, and it was going to be great. So maybe a little bit of over promising there, but ooh, what happened here? Oh, there's I didn't realize. Let me click through all of these things. So the goal of this project was to develop and promulgate regulations or rules that would guide this approach, that would guide this new permit type. And a typical regulatory development process in DNREC has these following steps. A bill signs, we have a workshop, we draft some regulations, we have maybe another public workshop or a hearing, and then those regulations are published. This is a basic approach, but we added a lot of stuff here as we developed regulations for the Coastal Zone Act. So let's go through this again. The coastal zone approach, many more steps here. And I'm going to talk about these steps as we move forward. Oh dear, I have to click through all of this again. This is what happens when you steal slides and you don't practice it very well beforehand. Here we go. So all of these things in this box, we added to this process to make sure that the process that we developed was robust, provided ample opportunity for all the feedback that we needed. But it also, added a lot of work and added a lot of time to the overall timeline. Okay. So I am not lying to you when I say this. We had a public process to figure out what the public process would be. That's correct. We had a public process to figure out the public process. And honestly, it was necessary and useful and worthwhile. Excessive? Some thought so. But we really needed to get it right because, as I talked about, we were a little bit in a hole. People wanted to be engaged. They wanted to have their voices heard. And we weren't entirely sure what the best way to go about doing that was. And so we went a little bit overboard and we did this. We hired a wonderful consultant to help us through the process. But in general, DNREC staff remained the face of the initiative. But the consultants were very helpful to us for doing some of the planning around the workshops and the things that we did. First, our consultant conducted one-on-one interviews with targeted stakeholders. And this was an important component so that people could have confidential discussions with a third party, an unbiased person, and the consultants did this, so that they could really say what they felt and not feel like there was, they were being pressured to have different thoughts or opinions or feel bad about the way that they felt. And so that was really important. The optics turned out to be pretty poor on the word confidential. And so we learned a lot of lessons around that. And that was the first time that had happened to this particular consultant who had utilized that language and that approach for a long time. So in addition, we got a lot of really good information from these interviews that was released, but not attributed to any specific person later on. That's what we meant. We meant we weren't going to attribute feedback to any specific person. But we got a lot of good information. Then we also added some workshops in addition so that we could talk to a broader audience about, well, what are your concerns and how do you want to be engaged as we move forward? And this was pretty successful. It was a small number of people, but we were able to have folks talk to each other at tables and talk to us in a larger context to find out what it was that they really wanted. So we had 2 workshops, both in communities that would be affected by this particular bill. And the process of people talking to each other was very impactful. And to the extent that you can, in your designs, having different stakeholders sit at a table with a facilitator and talk to each other is a really great strategy for for opening up perspectives and opening up new dialogue. And so that was very successful. But it takes a lot of people and a lot of facilitators to be able to do this. So once we had all this feedback from the workshops and from the interviews that we had, and there was also opportunity to just send us comments, um, we made a plan, and the consultants really helped us do this. So the plan laid out some of the concerns that we heard, ways that we could move forward engaging with people, and a plan for us to follow. And we followed that plan mostly. So the process to figure out the process is something that's pretty special and so far unique to the Coastal Zone Act process in my career. But that can certainly be a best practice for you. Ask people how they, you might not have to have 40 workshops, but asking people how they want to be involved and what will work best for them can make sure that we have good outcomes and good opportunities for engagement. So we also held additional workshops later in the Coastal Zone Act process. These were necessary and useful workshops, but they weren't overly special. So I'm not going to discuss them much further. But I do want to talk a little bit about the other things that we did, which was focused community outreach and the regulatory advisory committee process. And these are also best practices. So we are very cognizant of the fact, and perhaps even more so now than we were in 2017, 2018, that not everyone has the time and capacity to engage in workshops. People work, people have kids, people have obligations. They have many things that they're already involved in. So we went directly to the communities. Over about 4 months, our DENREC team, not the consultants, our DENREC team went to 8 community groups in 5 affected regions and talked to about 150 people this way. We went to them where they were and talked to them at, at their own community meetings. At these meetings, we were able to sit down in small groups and explain to, the community leaders the opportunity to participate that we had, the importance of their feedback, and how they would like to engage with us. We also, at that point, we collected their concerns and feedback right there. We heard a lot of concerns about traffic and air quality, but also concerns about job opportunities. So we went to Little Creek, we went to Claymont, we went to Edgemoor, went to Wilmington, a couple places in Wilmington. One of the challenges that we had in doing this, we wanted to go to many more meetings, but some of the civic groups that we reached out to were not active at the time, or they didn't have a leader. So it is complicated when you're doing this kind of work to find the right person, and that can be a very time-consuming endeavor. But these community meetings were a huge highlight and another best practice. Many of the folks that we had talked to had not ever intersected with DENREC in this way. Even though there had been newspaper stories and Facebook rants and Twitter feeds about, maybe not, no, Twitter existed then. Even though there had been a lot of press about the Coastal Zone Act and what was happening, many had no idea that this was actually happening. It wasn't something that they were paying attention to. And so when we went to them, they had an opportunity that they wouldn't have normally had to pay attention and to register their concerns. And I think we had better engagement after that because we had the opportunity to sit down in the communities and talk to them. And so this is something we want to deploy on a continuing basis. The other best practice that we use is the Regulatory Advisory Committee. So, and a Regulatory Advisory Committee is something that DENREC and other regulatory agencies utilize fairly frequently in a regulatory development process. So the Regulatory Advisory Committee itself, its existence wasn't particularly innovative, but I think how we did it was. So our Regulatory Advisory Committee, it was a diverse body who advised DENREC in the development of the regulations for the coastal zone conversion permits. And this was the primary group of people who heard and responded to public feedback in the development of the early materials. Obviously, DNREC staff was looking at public feedback and taking it into consideration, but the Regulatory Advisory Committee was really taking it into consideration in their deliberation. And this amplifies the public feedback and use of feedback. Because when public feedback is being seen by one person, it's I don't want to say it's easy to set it aside, but if it doesn't resonate with you, it may not move to the next level. Now we had this feedback being synthesized, thought about, and discussed by a group of 20 people. That changes and amplifies the public feedback that we were getting. I do just want to take a minute to recognize Justice Randy Holland. Justice Holland agreed to chair our Regulatory Advisory Committee and did a fantastic, thoughtful, amazing job at it. Justice Holland, I just heard that Justice Holland passed this week, and I just wanted to take that extra moment to recognize his significant contribution to this particular effort, but also to many other efforts in the state. So thank you, Justice Holland. You will be remembered. So the RAC's, the Regulatory Advisory Committee's job, and the raison d'etre, was to deliberate on all of the issues that we were working on for this and provide to DNREC a list of recommendations for, basically how to approach the regulations. They didn't write the technical wording, but they provided us the input so that we could write that technical wording. Luckily, I didn't have to write that, so I got out of that. So again, this is the group that reviewed the public comments, helped us, and looked at plans for public engagement after they were convened. So, and they also, they had plenty of their own feedback in addition to looking at the public feedback. There was a lot of feedback in this process. So I already said that the Regulatory Advisory Committee itself was not super special in and of itself. But the special thing is how we put this group together. For this Regulatory Advisory Committee, there was so much interest in the regulatory process for coastal zone conversion permits. And we knew we needed to put together a diverse body, and maybe we didn't know all the people that were out there who might be good on this committee, and certainly that was true. So we did an open call for nominations to serve on this committee, something that we had never done before. So our team made up that process. And if you want to know more about that process for your own stuff, I'm happy to share some of the forms that we developed. So we did an open call for nominations. We required an application form and a disclosure statement in case you had financial or job responsibilities in the coastal zone. We could look at those and make sure that there wasn't an undue conflict of interest. We looked at all of these nominations that came in and tried to balance the membership of the group, and then made some decisions about, we couldn't have everybody because managing a group of 45 people is too much. So we had to narrow it down and make sure that we had representatives who represented affected communities, but also affected businesses, some technical experts, etc. So I think the call for nominations that we did resulted in a much more diverse and engaged committee than we might have otherwise had if we had just, tapped into some of the people that we always tap into for these types of endeavors. So I'm almost done with my overview of the Regulatory Advisory Committee and the Coastal Zone Act. But I just want to share a couple best practices that I noted in this discussion. One, we were successful here. We got regulations drafted through the regulation process and finalized before the deadline that had been set for us by the legislature. And we did that and did all of this extra public engagement. So we were successful on that front, but also we were successful because everybody got somehow, some way was heard during this process. And I think my bosses will say that they knew that we were successful in this endeavor when the final regulations were not appealed. And I think that's some of the highest praise you can get is when you do something and you don't get sued over this, right? This is peak success for people in the regulatory field. And I think that's right. Was everybody happy with what happened? No. But because of the open and transparent process that we took, oh, I forgot to mention that at the Regulatory Advisory Committee meetings, public public comment was a component of each and every meeting that we had. Each and every time we convened a body, there was an opportunity for public comment, and all those meetings were public. And all of those meeting notes, meeting minutes, meeting notices, they were all on a website. Everything we did was extremely transparent and easy to access. So we also, we learned a lot. We did a lot of new stuff. We got a lot of gray hairs during this process, but having a process to develop the process, it's a worthwhile process. I highly recommend it. Steering committees can help diversify your perspective, whether it's a regulatory advisory committee or just a group of people who you set up, so you can hear and bounce ideas off and have them listen to public feedback. Stakeholders, talking to other stakeholders can also be transformative to moving forward. And going where your stakeholders are at, that is really important. Go to where the people already are. Don't make them come to you, because when you make them come to you, you're not going to be as successful as when you make it convenient to others. So again, as I was driving around the state yesterday, it also occurred to me that part of why we were, I think, very successful with coastal zone regulations was that we communicated and engaged in multiple channels, which means that there was a way for everybody to engage, no matter what their comfort level or ability to, right? We had in-person workshops. We had advisory committee meetings every month. The public could come, you could serve on the advisory committee. We had technical committees. We had community meetings in communities. And of course, we had comment forms and ways to send written comments through email or through the mail. And so there were a lot of different ways that you as a citizen could participate in what we were doing. And now there's Zoom. This was all pre-pandemic, all pre-Zoom. And, Zoom is changing everything. But many of the lessons that we learned and the things that we did in Coastal Zone Act still apply. But now we have another channel that we can use to engage stakeholders. And it has its limitations, but it also has its benefit. So I'm going to switch gears. I don't see any questions, I don't think, in the thing, but if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in there. Ooh, did I change anything? No, I'm good. So I want to switch gears, and I want to talk about another public process. I'm not going to talk as long this time, I promise. I want to talk about another public process that we just recently completed, and that was Delaware's Climate Action Plan and public engagement around the development of that plan, which was very different than what I just described to you for a Coastal Zone Act for a number of reasons. So just a couple words about the plan for context. Delaware's Climate Action Plan builds upon 2 decades of work on climate change here in Delaware, and it helps us meet our emissions reduction goals, integrate emission reductions and climate change adaptation, and set a course for climate change action in the decades ahead. If you haven't read it, it's an amazing plan. It can be found at de.gov/climate plan, de.gov/climate plan. It's got pretty pictures. It's easy to read. Go grab it. I think that's really all I'm going to say at this point about the plan itself, other than how we engage the public to develop that plan. So in between Coastal Zone Act and now, we got a little better with graphics. So our initial project timeline was let me back up. This was a different product. It's not regulatory. It's a planning document. It's not required by law. So this is something, and it was new. So we haven't done a plan like this in the state before. And so we had a different approach for public engagement for this type of plan. And that approach really relied heavily on in-person public workshops, technical workshops with technical experts, and also we also wanted to go out to the communities like we did in Coastal Zone Act. We knew that was really important and it was very successful. So we wanted to spend significant time going to community meetings and talking about climate change. So we plan to do a round of public workshops in spring of 2020, another round of workshops in fall of 2020, and then publish the plan after that, with a lot of other work in between. So we actually got to do our public workshops in March of 2020. It was the first week of March 2020. And I talked about engaging in multiple channels. So this was a workshop, but at the workshop, you could engage in multiple channels. We did all of the things at this workshop. We had live polls, we had presentations, we had group exercises where people had to talk to each other about climate change, which was really cool and really valuable. We had poster sessions. We had make your own video. You could put sticky dots on things. There, you could draw things on maps. I mean, we had all of it. It was enormously complicated, but you had to come in person to be able to participate in all of those channels. There was also a lot of alcohol hand gel, because COVID was starting to come to the East Coast, and we were very cognizant that something might need to change with our process. But we had a few hundred people show up at these workshops, maybe about 200 total. We did a workshop in each county, and we had over 100 show up in Wilmington, which was great. So right, we had a great plan, and we got to do part one of the plan, and we got really great feedback that we used in our next phase, which was data modeling and sitting down with technical experts to get more information. But what could go wrong? Well, we didn't plan for a global pandemic. That's a mistake we won't make again. So we had to shift very quickly in third week of March 2020. And we actually held on for quite a while, thinking that we would be able to continue with in-person engagement over the summer and in the fall. And that was during a time when nobody really knew or understood just how long this was going to go on. And somewhere around June, I think it became clear that we were going to have to switch to an all digital environment. And that was something we had never done before. And we barely knew what Zoom was. So step one, I was told, step one is panic, not don't panic. Certainly there was some panic. What do? We don't have a Zoom account. What is Zoom? Nobody knows how to use a computer. My mom can't engage on the online. How are we going to do this? So we wanted to stay as close to the original time schedule as possible. But again, this was a very challenging time because none of us knew how to use Zoom. None of our stakeholders knew how to use Zoom. So we went back and we looked at the plan and decided that, it was still the right plan. We just had to figure out a way to take it online and to try to do some of those same things. And so what doesn't change, right? All of these things don't change. We just had to change the way in which we did them. So at this time, I just want to give Maggie Pletta and Ian Yu, both who are on the climate action team and both who have now taken new opportunities to go do great things other places, but they deserve all the credit for putting this public engagement plan together. They researched, why is Zoom workshops on? There we go. They researched best practices. They sat on a million webinars in May, June, July, to learn how to basically use Zoom, to learn how to use this digital environment to do really robust public engagement in an online setting. So we we lost, though, opportunities to do what we truly wanted to do, which was get out to as many community meetings as we possibly could, and especially with frontline communities, those who could be most worst impacted by the global climate challenge, and listen to their concerns and maybe try to encourage them to go to a workshop. Um, it was not feasible during this time. The community meetings were not happening. Communities all over the state were extremely stressed by everything that was happening and continues to happen in the world. And so we were not able to do this community engagement as much as we really wanted to. We plan to do increasingly more community specific engagement as the COVID crisis lifts. And especially as we get into implementing specific things in the climate action plan, particularly those that are geographically based, for which there could be an adjacent community or impacted community. So that's still a really important strategy. It just, we couldn't find a way to meaningfully do that on this timeline that we have. But we tried other new things. In addition to the 5 Zoom workshops that we did in fall of 2020, we also did, for the first time, Denrick had never done this before, we did paid social media ads. It feels a little icky sometimes, but we targeted people through Facebook and tried to get our message to them. We had fun climate change videos, and ads for upcoming Zoom workshops. We tried to target to people who we knew are impacted by climate change and who we knew we needed to hear from, but folks who don't often show up at DENREC workshops. I don't know that we were successful, but boy, did we try. And so we will try that some more to try to get more folks to the table, for these meetings. One thing I'll mention, also, before I forget to mention it, is that we are very cognizant of our need to do better for people who don't speak English as their first language. And we worked really hard on this at and also because we know climate change affects everyone, no matter what language you speak. We had Spanish language interpreters available at our in-person public workshops. And our recent workshops, our fall workshops, we had, they were closed captioned. And at our recent workshops, we actually had live Spanish translation on Zoom, which actually was way easier than one would think. We've also translated every single one of our climate documents, climate change plan documents, into Spanish. So if you want to read the climate action plan in Spanish, it's available. If you want to read the executive summary in Spanish, it's available. If you want to read the brochures and the one-pagers in Spanish, it's available for you, and that's all online. And so we were really pleased to be able to figure out how to do that, and that's going to be something that we will continue to do moving forward. Now we've got a vendor and the contractual thing all figured out. So what did we learn during the pivot to Zoom? We're on this isn't Zoom, but it's a Zoom platform. At the end of the day, we had historically high attendance for these workshops, right? Zoom is convenient. You don't have to drive anywhere. You can sit, you can sit in front of you can watch you don't have to have a babysitter for your kids. You can make dinner and listen to what's happening, right? So Zoom is very convenient for people, but you lose a little bit of something on a Zoom meeting. By the time we had these workshops in September of 2020, people were much more comfortable with online platforms and the convenience that it was if they had internet access, right? We know that is a challenge for many folks. We did We did try a couple things that fell flat. A little bit of our online engagement fell flat, and we learned from that. The online structure limited conversations between participants, right? In that online, in the in-person world, that facilitated discussion between participants was really helpful. And it just gets lost in the sauce on Zoom. So that's something that we will increasingly be trying to do a better job of. So what we learned, we had really high attendance for online webinars. So we know that if we want to get information out to people, these webinars are a good opportunity, not for real, true engagement. We heard that people want to be engaged both in person and online. We did a follow-up survey. That's what we heard from people, that when COVID ends, they want the opportunity to engage in person and on Zoom. And so that pressures us now, I think, as public servants, to be able to offer similar opportunities to people who prefer in person and who prefer Zoom engagement. So that might increase our workload, but at the end of the day, by providing more channels for people to engage in, we will get better information on the other side. So thoughts for moving forward, sort of from this framework. And from the coastal zone framework. As I just mentioned, in-person and virtual meetings paired together are the future. So get ready for it. That is now the expectation. Whenever possible, go to where your stakeholders are, and maybe, do extra to go where your stakeholders are. Translate your materials into Spanish, and don't shy away from doing a process for the process. Very serious about that. And that's our last slide. Wait, I feel like I had something more. That's okay. I'm done talking. I've been talking at you for 45 minutes now. So I'm going to go to our final slide, and I'm going to see if there are any questions, if we have any thoughts. Does somebody want to unmute and tell us an experience that you have or a challenge that you're having? We have 15 more minutes left, and it's raining outside, so you're stuck inside. Does anyone have any? See, this is the thing. You don't get a lot of two-way engagement in a Zoom environment. If we were in person, you would all have sticky notes and some posters, and we'd be doing some work together. Oh, I'll stop sharing my screen at this point. Well, if there are no questions, and I'm just not seeing them, so somebody help me if I'm missing a place where questions are or comments. I'll put this whiteboard back up and see if anybody can use it. But please feel free. Janelle says I missed the color sticky notes. I know. I have a whole bag full right behind me here. Sticky notes are my favorite thing, and there are ways you can get the sticky note experience. And the Bizaabo platform that we're on right now, I couldn't figure out, but there are many platforms out there, and I think with us, as a group working together, we can find and share strategies for having engagement. It's just never going to be as good online. Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions, I guess we will wrap it up at this time. I will put my email down here. You may have it, but I'm happy. I can't talk and type at the same time. I am happy to share with you any of my materials. I think the presentations will probably be shared. I'm happy to answer questions or point you in the right direction if you've been inspired by anything that I've had to say here. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll stick around for a few minutes in case you want to come off camera and chat. But I appreciate your time and attention, and hope you guys have a great day. Go engage with your folks.